Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 40k Badcast. I'm Dan Boyd, and I'm joined by my very pretty and kind of, but not really all the way, elegant co-hosts Campbell McLaughlin. Campbell, we're bad at 40k.
Yeah. I've heard. I'm actually pretty well versed in the fact that we're terrible at 40k.
Well, when we talk about our party in the woods that we had, 2 weeks ago, you know, we'll really see who's bad at 40k and who's kind of good at 40k over here. But it's episode 15 of the Badcast. Thanks for joining us once again. We've got an action-packed episode today. I can't wait. Should we get into it?
Dude, this is my favorite kind of episode, the one where you talk about an event that no one else could have gone to but you. You talk about it at length.
I promise it'll be good. All right, let's go to the Auspecs and figure out what's on our hobby radar. I am going to start. I'm almost done with my first squad of Intercessors of the Dark Imperium box set for my Raven Guard Primaris Marines, and I am so fucking tired of edge highlighting black armor. Holy fuck.
I was about to ask if you're having fun painting those guys, but I think I know the answer now.
They look great. I'm so happy with how they're turning out, but edge highlighting takes fucking forever. I've been working on the same 5 models for what feels like 2 weeks.
Yeah, and after painting so many hordes of guardsmen, that's gotta feel kind of really laborious.
It does, because guardsmen are fucking super easy to paint. Especially Armageddon Steel Legion guardsmen who were made in fucking 1997 and they don't have much in the way of detail.
Mm-hmm.
And tanks. I've been doing shit tons of tanks, you know? Like, I mean, the Blood Bowl guys that I've done recently are, you know, pretty detailed, but it's not all the same palette.
Dude, just wait until you're doing edge highlights on Land Raiders and shit like that. That takes forever. There's a reason I haven't touched my Storm Raven yet.
Fuck that shit. That gets dry brushed. That's all fucking squares. Who fucking cares about that? But I've been working on a lot of those guys. Almost got them done. I bought a bunch of shit, even though I said I wouldn't buy a bunch of shit. But I bought. It comes today. I'm not going to be able to pick it up today, but I'll get it tomorrow. A Trojan and a Vulture from Forge World.
Mm-hmm.
I purchased them. Because I want the Trojan for Nova. And
yeah, because it makes your tanks stupid.
Well, I think I'm only going to use it. Well, I don't know if I'm only going to use it in one game, but I'm only at the moment planning to use it in the big Apocalypse game at the end of Nova, so I can hide it behind my Shadow Sword and make my Shadow Sword reroll to hit the whole game.
It's so gross.
Yeah, you want to be on my team, listeners. You don't want to be on the other team. So other than that, I've been really playing a fuck ton of games. We're going to get to games played in a minute. So what are you working on?
So I finished up a Black Templar's Venerable Dreadnought. I wanted to have it ready for the thing we did over the weekend, but unfortunately, when I fractured my shoulder, I couldn't finish it. But I got to finish it now. I'm working on that. I'm working on a squad of Black Templar's Terminators, and I just assembled and primed my first 5 Blood Ravens for painting contest at Alpha Omega over in Quincy that they're doing at the end of the month. So those guys are the start of my Bird Bros, and they are now officially underway.
I can't wait until we can take them, our Ravens to a team tournament and lose spectacularly.
As we have nothing but very specialized troops wholly on foot from the same starter set. Yeah, we're going to do great.
It's going to be really, really awesome.
It's going to be exactly what you'd expect from both Badcasters in the tabletop at the same time.
So I've also been doing a little bit of Blood Bowl stuff for my league, which is getting close to wrapping up. We just finished our first ever rally day to get a bunch of players who had not played really enough games into, get close to the 10 games that were suggested to get into the playoffs, and had a lot of fun with that. Hosted at my house, the first ever gaming hosting I've done, I don't know, ever.
How'd that go? Did you have not much table space, or?
I bought a table. I went to Lowe's and I bought a 6-foot, or I guess 72-inch by 30-inch folding table that fits a Blood Bowl setup very nicely. And if I buy another one, I'll have a good setup for a 40k game.
Solid.
So that was a lot of fun. Blood Bowl, man. It doesn't suck.
Yeah. That's a ringing endorsement if ever I heard one.
So
better than surgery. Blood Bowl.
Better than a stick in the eye. So we've
Beats doing taxes.
All right, so before we get into Peter's Pyrovore party in the woods. We've both played a couple of games outside of that. I played a game against Mike Brandt last night, and I learned that with the new Chaos Codex, Berserkers are extremely scary.
Oh, yeah, they are.
They move like fucking greased lightning, and they chop and grind everything in front of them to fucking mulch. It's kind of insane.
Yeah, what's scarier, the first assault phase or the second assault phase they get?
Or how about the third assault phase when they fucking turn them on with that stratagem that they get, and it's like, oh, great, now I've got a whole bunch of Berserkers right in the middle of my fucking parking lot.
Right there in Codex, fourth meal.
Yeah, so played a game against him. It was very swingy. There was a turn where I spent my entire army shooting at a fucking fetid blight drone. It has 10 wounds. I did 9 wounds to it.
Yeah, they don't die.
Though I did kill it the next turn. No, I killed it that turn because a sentinel kicked it to death in combat. He charged a sentinel, and a sentinel killed it with a fucking kick, which was pretty hilarious. Then
rules.
The very next turn, I shot a Manicore, 2 Basilisks, and a Leman Russ at a Rhino that had 1 wound left. And guess what, Campbell?
Everything exploded?
No, it did. I did not take out that 1 wound. I had to shoot. In 2 Wyverns. I shot both my Wyverns at it too. So 2 Wyverns, 2 Basilisks, a Leman Russ battle tank with 3 heavy bolters, and a Manticore. Did not take out 1 wound from a fucking Rhino full of Berserkers. So I was like, fuck, I have to start shooting squads at it. And the first squad that shoots at it kills it with a fucking las gun.
I guess the thing is, at that point, like, while that is like serendipitous, at that point it doesn't even feel good anymore.
No, I was super fucking salty. Because like the first game turn, I'm shooting at this fucking bloat drone because it's about to go maul my fucking guardsman, and I can't kill it. Shoot everything I have at it, can't kill it. Then it hilariously gets kicked to death in combat by a fucking sentinel, and I'm like, that's cool. Next turn, there's a fucking 1 wound Rhino. Shoot my fucking entire army at it, can't kill it. Mm-hmm. Shoot some dinky fucking lasguns at it, kill it, and I'm just like, you motherfucker. I got salty. I had to apologize to Mike afterwards because I was fucking being mean.
Yeah, I can understand why. It gets frustrating, and when it's that's just frustrating, man. Because that's the whole point of like 8th edition is shit happens now, and when it doesn't happen, it's really, really bad. Yeah.
So the game ended up like I think it was either 16 or 17 to 15 in points. So it was a very tight game, but it was real swingy because at one point it looked like he was going to win, and then another point it looked like he was about to get tabled, and then he made some. I swear to God, man! Every time a unit deep strikes near any of my tanks that I need to shoot, they always fucking make their 9-inch charge with no rerolls. They just make it like, oh, there's an 11.
So maybe you and I should play again.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you fucking deep strike your Terminators, then you'll fucking just mulch my fucking tanks. They're terrible.
Hey,
but you played in a doubles tournament, right?
Yeah, as Alpha Omega Hobby in Quincy, and they had a doubles tournament this past weekend. It was 900 points per player, which is a little awkward, and the goal was to have 5 games. And the run time was from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m., so 5 games didn't happen, and it also didn't end till 9 because Warhammer. So anyway, I brought...
That's extremely ambitious.
It is extremely ambitious, but I'll get to that in a minute. So I brought my Templars, basically the same stuff I brought to Peter's this weekend, so just a lot of charging guys on foot because that's just kind of what I have. My teammate, however, brought 72 Fire Warriors and enough characters to buff them so they could get up to 48 shots in rapid fire range each guy. So that was insane.
That seems like a lot of shooting.
Yeah, it is a lot of shooting.
Is 72 Fire Warriors, is that 6 squads of 12 Fire Warriors?
It's like 6 squads of 12, then like a Fireblade, then like an Accelerator drone, then this other drone, then the Space Pope. It's just all sorts of shit that basically means ideally each guy can get 4 shots per model.
I thought the Space Pope was an Imperial character.
I guess the Protestant Space Pope is Tau.
No. Oh, man.
Maybe the Presbyterian. I don't know.
The Lutheran Space Minister. Apologies to all of you with religious inclinations at that last part of this show.
Good. Covering our bases.
Covering them.
So our first game was against just as fluffy as our pairing. We were against Space Wolves and Thousand Suns teamed up together.
Oh, that works.
Yeah, and apparently our opponents misread a rule because they were getting re-rollable 2-up armor saves due to Allah's Dust, but apparently the rerolls only apply to invuln saves, but they didn't know that. So anyway, the Wolves all got killed in Overwatch because there is a silly oversight in the Tau rules where the Tau can, they can do the covering fire thing, where if you charge a friendly unit, they get to Overwatch at them. It says friendly unit, not Tau unit, not keyword unit, just friendly.
Uh-oh.
So they would charge. They'd be like, well, I don't want to charge those Tau guys because, they'll shoot us up. So we'll charge the Black Templars, and they got shot up anyway. So yeah, on like turn 3 or so, the Wolf guy was off the table. The Thousand Suns were about to get punched to death by my Dreadnought, and the Wolf player was sitting there in the corner being like, net listy bullshit. I'm like, yeah, sorry. Basically, my teammate John shot a lot. I died a lot, and that's about it.
Sounds good.
Second game was against Primaris Iron Hands and Primaris Imperial Fists. Both opponents were awesome guys. They're fun opponents. Their painted models were painted pretty damn well, and we had a really funny game where I just charged everything forward and got absolutely murdered while the Tau shot everything to death. You will see a theme here. At the end of the game, we'd killed most of the enemy models. I had 6 guys left on the table, and they'd only killed 8 of the Fire Warriors, and it was a kill points mission, so we won pretty handily. Our third and final game, because we were not getting 5 games into that day, was against Chaos and Necrons. The Chaos guy, his army ruled. There was stuff going back to Rogue Trader, and they're like the weird old, really lumpy Plague Marines and so on. And he had some of those Khorne Berserkers that I got to hang out with. And the Necron guy, his stuff was just primed silver, and he had a fucking pylon and 900 points. I guess he expected to face super heavies and knights, and he was disappointed they didn't have anything to shoot the thing at. So that thing killed my Dreadnought, didn't do anything else all game. But anyway, stuff just kind of didn't die except for my stuff. Only my stuff died again. So at the end of the game, it was actually a tie. So we went 2-1, or 2 wins and a tie. And I kind of really realized that my Black Templars are just not working, and I need to get rides for all of them. I need Land Raiders. I need to paint my Storm Raven because these guys on foot are not cutting it.
Well,
but
I think you talked about how you're at least purchased a Land Raider Crusader.
I'm in the market for one. I've got a Land Raider Excelsior, which is slightly different, but I want to get a Crusader too. Because again, Crusaders, they're Templars. But anyway, the event was well attended. There were 32 people there, I think.
That's good.
About 6 of them actually had painted armies, unfortunately. But what I did find out was a lot of them were new players, or people returning after a long hiatus, and they'd either sold off their old stuff or had bought new stuff and were using that instead. I met some pretty cool folks there, one of whom I actually convinced to go to the Nova Narrative Games if he can make it into it, because he's going to be at Nova. And some other folks that I'm going to be trying to get games in sometime pretty soon, possibly at that store, possibly elsewhere. And as for the store, they've got terrain now, so they've got a bunch of like fat mats out and a lot of terrain that's like a lot of 3D printed stuff that's made by actually my teammate John and some other people in the community, and other cool donated terrain. I think it was a learning experience for the guys running it, because they really should have run a tighter ship for it. But it was fun. Everyone was there, was seeming to have a pretty good time, and no one was an asshole, which in a tournament is pretty good.
I'm glad to hear it, man.
Mm-hmm. See, it's not exactly my scene doing the tournament thing, but it was cool. Got to meet a lot of new people, make a lot of friends, play a lot of 40k, and find out how bad my army is.
We've got a ton of games played in our next segment of the Auspex that we're going to roll into our next segment of the show, because this segment is all about games we've played, because we went up to our friend Peter's house in beautiful, like really, really nice Greenwood Lake, New York, to have a weekend of slamming hams.
And beers. And not necessarily in that order.
A lot of beers were slammed. And a lot of burgers were slammed.
Yeah, the slam burgers.
Those were delicious. My favorite part is when you made them wrong.
My favorite part of everything is when I mishandle meat.
Campbell, the meat mishandler McLaughlin.
So Dan, you'd say we're both guys. We're, boys, you could say.
We're both human males.
We've left our respective homes, but now we've returned. We're back in our towns. Dan, the boys are back in town.
Okay, listeners, you know what? Campbell's doing something I hate when I listen to podcasts, and he's doing inside jokes that none of you will fucking get. Maybe there will be 10 of you that will get that, because at the Pete's Pyrovore party in the woods, the boys kept coming back in the forms of demons, rolling ones on morale checks, and then respawning and flooding the field with their recently risen corpses.
And every time that happened, their only player, Chelsea, would play on her phone, "The boys are back in town." And you bet your ass that happened a lot in all the games they played.
It was good, man. That was a really fun time. I want to thank Peter for hosting that. He was so inviting and so friendly. I've never done something like that. Go to somebody's house for a weekend to play 40k, and I had an amazing time.
So if you grew up in like rural America, you probably are familiar with the concept of the cabin party, where you go to someone's family's cabin in the woods and there's usually a bunch of booze and snacks and you just kind of hang out there for a couple of days. And that was kind of what this is, but with Warhammer on top of that. The space is in New York. It was kind of like Ron Swanson's house with a bunch of game tables set up. And there were probably, over a dozen folks there? From around the area and a little further?
There were 4 tables set up, right? I think it was 4 tables set up, and I think there were 10 people about playing in each round, so there were a doubles game or 2 going on in every round. And the house was rocking, man. It was happening.
With this sort of thing, especially when you've got, a lot of partying going on, a lot of socializing, snacking, drinking, and so on, the things can really kind of fall apart and you'll have people looking for a dance partner. But Peter actually organized everything ahead of time. He had this board up, or this tape up over the mantle, which had saying game 1, this time, this table, these players, game 2, etc. And although that might seem like kind of an official thing for something that is generally very casual, it helped a ton in actually getting people to get to play games and have a good time.
Yeah, it was really easy format, really nice group of people, a lot of new friends, Campbell.
Oh yeah, like I've met a few of them before because I'd been there the year before, and that's how I was like, yeah, you got to go this time. But a lot of, everyone there is a friend first and a gamer second, if that makes sense. Because, when you go to, say, a tournament or a convention, people are there to play Warhammer. They happen to make friends as they're there for longer, and you'll start to see friendly faces, and they'll socialize more and more. But the main reason they're there is to game. Here, it's just a good group of friends who happen to play this game and happen to use that as a means to socialize and have a good time. Everyone was super warm and inviting, and I felt just one of these folks who, I've known them forever too.
Yeah, they made us me feel at least like I was part of the gang. So Peter, Thomas, and all the rest of y'all, thank you so much for the invite. I had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do it again. But Campbell, let's talk about the games.
Yeah, and we each played in a few games. Most against other people. I want to
talk about our first game because
I don't want to talk about the game again.
Because it perpetuated the idea that whenever we meet at an event to play, I kick your ass.
With the exception of the time you played my orcs, that is true.
So I think our lifetime record, the season series of Campbell and Dan is something like 4-1 me.
Yeah, and me giving you my orcs is like inviting you over to play Super Smash Brothers and giving you the broken controller. It's like, what do you mean all the buttons stick?
So we played our first game. It was a 2-on-1 game with our new friend Jameson and you. Against me. Both of you had 1,000 points. I had 2,000 points. And right off the bat, it was not going to look good for the two of you because you had a lot of Marines on foot and 2 people with 1,000-point lists playing one person with 2,000-point lists is never fair to the 2 people.
So I will also say Marines on foot doing poorly and 2v1s being kind of a raw deal is one of my running themes of the weekend.
So you guys really ran into it because I brought wyverns and manticores and tanks and stuff, and it was just like, hey, look at all these shots, and I killed all those Marines in one turn of shooting. Oh, that sucks. So sorry.
Yeah. You had the classic Dan Boyd parking lot, featuring an infantry screen, though. That was nice. That gave us something to shoot at and charge occasionally. And we were on a really cool table where it was kind of like the Jurassic Park electric fences.
There was half of it was like a paddock, like a fenced-in area.
it was like a fenced area with a crashed Valkyrie and an airfield, and the other half was all jungly. And because Peter has tons of this handmade, super custom, super detailed jungle terrain made of the old GW trees and aquarium plants and like Playmobil play sets and shit, like things you would not even expect to be part of this. I've been upcycled into terrain. It looks fantastic.
Yeah. So our first game didn't go so well for you and Jameson on the field, but I still think it was a really fun time where we got to hang out and drink a lot of beers and just, be in this hobby that we like so much.
Oh yeah, my problem was not the company; it was the dice on the table.
Yeah. Well, it'll happen. So that was we only played one game on that was on Friday night.
Yep.
And the next morning, you, myself, and our new friend Zach went out to get some breakfast at the little town nearby, where Zach and I talked about how my friend Kevin, who has kicked my ass a whole bunch with his orcs, and Zach was like, what kind of list did he use? And I told him, and then he built that list, and we were playing in the next game.
How'd that go?
It didn't go well for him at all. I seized the initiative, and if I hadn't seized the initiative, it probably would have been a different tale. But when Guard sees the initiative, it's kind of a big deal.
It's the reason why Guard don't get to go first in this edition. It should just be the first sentence of the Codex. You don't get to go first. Sorry.
You go second every single time. So it turned into, he just had trouble keeping up after the first turn there, and didn't end too well for him, though he's a nice guy, and I had a lot of fun playing him. However, the table we played at was at coffee table height.
Yeah, that was the table that was in like the living room area where it had all this Necromunda-looking terrain from some like laser cut Kickstarter thing that was pretty cool looking.
Yeah, it was. It was a really cool looking board. It was an excellent looking situation, man. But those low tables are just brutal on the lower back.
Yeah, I don't feel bad for not getting to play on that table. But from up where I was, which is up on a landing above you, I could actually look down and get the bird's eye view of the whole battle, and that's rare. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and that game was at, I think, 1,500 points, and it definitely featured the patented Dan Boyd parking lot, and the Dan Boyd parking lot did extremely well against orcs in battle wagons and on foot.
Yeah. So while you were playing that game, I was playing against Peter's Genestealer cult, it was a mix of Genestealer cult that he mostly converted before they even had a codex, and Catachan models.
So
and they're all
real quick, before you get into your game, can we talk about Peter for a minute?
About Ron Swanson Jr.? Yes.
Yeah. Peter is a very, very impressive young man who I think is close to my age, right? He's in his early 30s?
He's late 20s, early 30s.
Okay,
yeah.
something like that. He is a very outdoorsy type guy, very athletic, you could say. So Campbell, you brought him a shirt that you had that didn't fit you very well, but fit him well, and it was a Catachan t-shirt, wasn't it?
Yeah, so Black Library had a Catachan t-shirt very briefly for like a week available a few years ago, and it's like Catachan Devil's Training Corps and has all this iconography on it, but I guess British men have slighter shoulders than I do because it does not fit over my frame, so I brought it to him, and he is like Catachan to the core, and he runs the other room. He puts on that and like camo pants and like a harness and a machete on his waist that he's using to open bottles all weekend.
He was cosplaying fucking Catachans the entire weekend.
Yeah, I don't think he got out of that shirt.
My favorite part is when he got wasted on Saturday night and disappeared into the woods for a while.
With the machete.
With the machete. He was fine. It's fucking Peter. He'll be all right.
And then he came back and he opened another beer with the machete.
All right, so tell us about your game.
All right, so it was against his army, which is so him, and has it's also based heavily on Jurassic Park. So as we mentioned with like the table in the last game, so his like Manticore was actually Lizardmen, this Triceratops thing, the Stegodon, but with like a converted bionic leg, and there's like a guy riding on it with a heavy bolter, and there's a machine like big cupola on the back with these missile launchers and stuff like that. And a lot of his tanks and a lot of his vehicles are converted up. And he actually has his own codex, which goes over all the counts as stuff. And it's all this like homebrew fluff full of in-jokes and full of references and things like that. And that's really impressive. But so in this game, I don't know how well he's been doing with Gene Stealer Cult in the new edition, but from the sound of it, he and I were kind of on a race to the bottom with his Gene Stealer Cult and my footbound Black Templars. I had been hyping up how badass the Emperor's Champion is, because I mentioned in the last show that he carved through Typhus and a bunch of our Death Guard characters. He got even cheaper with the new codex. He's just this badass character killer, and he gets fucking punked on Overwatch by a mining laser and a grenade launcher from a random cultist squad.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, I was mad about it at the time, or at least a little salty about it at the time. Looking back, it's hilarious, but it's because I was talking up how fucking badass he is, how dangerous this guy is, and he just gets punked on a couple of sixes. But yeah, so that game did swing in my favor. Although, his Gene Stealers were scary as hell, but after their first charge, his dice were going kind of cold on him, and I was able to, kind of maneuver some veterans around and get things to do what I wanted them to do. My armless Dreadnought was just a wrecking ball going down the middle of the table. But again, it was this beautiful terrain. It was all hand-carved foam stuff with Lego Bionicle bits stuck in there to look like ancient temples. It was a cool table. His army looked great on it. I posted a bunch of pictures on Something Awful. I can post them in the show notes too, because it was a good-looking game.
Yeah, it also sounded like you guys were having a ton of fun.
Oh, yeah. It was... of the 4 games I had that weekend, spoiler alert, it's the one I won. But no, we were both on the same page. We were both having a really good time.
Third game for me that was against Peter's brother Thomas, who really nice guy. Who when we were just remembered this when we were playing Stump, which is a very hilarious game that we're not going to go into. He destroyed a stump with a very heavy hammer, which. I kind of saw it coming because he's a very clearly athletic person with some serious build to him. So it was pretty funny to get him all riled up and give him something to destroy.
But you did become the Stump King.
He is the king of all stumps. It is true. He was rolling Dark Eldar with a couple of flyers and a lot of raiders and bikers and stuff, and I was rolling with my guard, and it was a game where I just couldn't catch up. His stuff was moving around too quick. My guys weren't, these random number of shots for things, like Russes and Basilisks and all that shit.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's great. Sometimes you roll 6s. Sometimes you roll 1s. And it just sort of caught up to me. Didn't really do a whole lot of great shooting in this game. And he won pretty handily. We did a Maelstrom mission with the cards. Which it was the first Maelstrom mission I'd done all weekend. So... It was a good game though. I had a good time, but I definitely lost.
I mean, that sounds kind of like my third game, which was against Brandon. He has he has an Eldar army, but it's all Star Wars toys.
Yeah,
so
I remember
it's
that.
all so there's definitely kind of okay, please tell me what every one of these things is, because I have no idea what it is. But it's a mix of Micro Machines action fleet, plane land speeders and X-wings to count as his grav tanks and his Eldar flyers, and then a bunch of Star Wars miniatures, like metal miniatures. They're painted pretty well and based pretty well. That were his aspect warriors and so on. So once we got all that down, we actually started rolling. And my footbound 1,500 point Black Templar list, believe it or not, can't keep up with an army of just jet bikes, grav tanks, and flyers. Turn 2,
what do you know?
Yeah, turn 2, I was almost tabled, but I'd killed 4 jet bikes, so I got that going for me.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it was a bad matchup. Nothing against Brandon. He's a swell dude, but it was just not a good matchup. And it kind of made me realize that this army, as it is not working. And unfortunately, that was not my last experience of my army not working that weekend.
Yeah. You got one more game in, right, on Sunday after I left?
Exactly. Sunday, you headed out, and I got to squeeze in one last game, where this time Brandon was on my side in a 2v1 against Eric and Eric's AdMech. Eric's AdMech looks pretty cool. His he has this ice spacing on them. It's like this cracked ice spacing that looks really sweet. But he had this big AdMech army.
Big shout out to Eric for helping me drain the cooler I had brought full of beers. I brought a bunch of Virginia craft beers. And he was dedicated to making sure that the cooler I took home was empty. And I really appreciate that, Eric. You did a great job.
I think we all did our part.
I think he went above and beyond.
Overachiever. But yeah, so his army was a big AdMech army with like Belisarius Call and a Knight Atropos, which does Christ knows what, just makes things go away. So the first like 2 or 3 turns was Eric just picking Brandon's flyers out of the air, taking his tanks apart, just killing everything. Like the Atropos has an ability where if it blows up one vehicle, it can shoot another vehicle immediately afterwards. If it like so it can shoot weapons multiple times.
Is that a Forge World guy?
It is a Forge World guy that did not want to stand up or stay together, and it was really kind of harrowing every time he moved that model.
Well, we know how balanced those Forge World rules are.
Yeah, says the guy who just put in a Forge World order for, what was it, Trojan and a Punisher Vulture?
Yeah, because the rules are so fucking balanced.
Good. I'm glad you were
complete
committed.
Sincerity.
I'm glad you were committed to game balance. So anyway, so this game, right from turn 1, I was like, oh no. And at the end of turn 1, I was like, oh no. And at the start of turn 2, I was like, okay, we're not winning this one at all. We are not winning this one. So, because clearly, like, Eric has fought Brandon before and wiped him out before. So I'm like, okay, so far he's ignoring my shit because my stuff's not dangerous because it's Marines on foot, but he's killing everything that can move more than, 6 inches a turn. So I think, okay, I'm not going to win here, but what can I do? What can I do that's cool? What can I do that's fun? I'm like, okay, how many wounds does the Knight have left? Oh, like 32? Okay, not that. Belisarius Call right there. He's tough, right? And he's like, yeah, he's like one of the toughest characters in the game. He's got this crazy save. I'm like, okay, what do all his weapons do? All right, the Emperor's Champion is charging him. Yes. So I talked this guy up last episode. So on the charge, he has 5 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling misses, strength 7, AP -3, rerolling wounds, I think, and against characters. And I put down 15 wounds on Belisarius Call and murder him in one charge.
Fuck yes.
And I don't care about anything else that happened in that game because it was not pretty after that. But that part was fucking awesome. And I fucking ran around the house, being like, yeah, kill Belisarius Call.
You did a victory lap, yeah.
Yeah, I did a victory lap. If I had more battery life on my phone, I probably would have played Space Jam right then and there. So anyway, moral victory, and we didn't get tabled. Brandon had 2 models left on the table that were only alive because they were hidden from line of sight, and I still had like 3 guys hiding in a bush somewhere.
I mean, hey, that works, man. That's good shit.
Yeah. So yeah, I played 4 games. Had a pretty good time. Was happy to hang out with all these lovely, lovely folks.
Yeah, and that was a really special weekend. Really, really cool that we got to go do that. And I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, it's not like a regular thing, but man, when I hear the call again, I will be there.
Certainly. All right, next segment, we got an interview with Joe Kopena from the Nova Narrative team and Page Gaming up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's a friend of ours for a few years now, a great dude who runs a lot of really cool gaming events up there. So here it is. Okay, everybody, we are here with our friend, the one and only Joe Kopena. Joe, welcome to the 40k Badcast.
Hey guys, great to talk with you.
So, listeners, you might not be acquainted with Joe like we are, so let's talk about him for a second. Joe runs the 40k narrative event at Nova Open. He has for, I think last year was your first year, and this will be your second year, right?
That's correct.
That Campbell and I love so much. And you also run 40k X-Wing and Infinity events in the Philadelphia area.
Yeah, we just had our big Liberty Hammer event right after 8th edition came out. Had like 40 people playing a weekend-long narrative.
Oh, for real?
Cool.
Yep.
How'd that work out?
Super good.
Was that with, our friend Johnny Lama, our mutual friend, tried to get me to come up for that, but I was moving that weekend and couldn't take the time away from home. But I really wanted to come up for that one. That sounded a lot of fun. But we've come to events of yours before. We come to the 40K Philly Apocalypse every year, and that's a ton of fun when there aren't 3-up rerollable invulnerable demons flying everywhere. And maybe this time, Joe, if you'll have me back, I'll bring troops so I can actually score objectives in this battle.
I think we're just going to assign you a bodyguard this time to protect your tanks.
Yeah, they'll need it. Okay, so we wanted to talk to you since you are pretty active in the 40K community, organizing events and playing a lot of games. we wanted to ask you how you're finding 8th edition. And I'm going to start off by asking, what do you think is the biggest change, the most important change that 8th edition or Games Workshop, as an entity, has brought forth with the new 40K?
I actually think the biggest thing is not directly in the game rules itself, but it's their whole train of thought, right? The overhauling the game in such a dramatic fashion could have been a complete disaster, and it wasn't, right? I thought they did a pretty great job actually at basically forecasting all the changes that were coming and running the weekly previews and so on, so people really had time to adjust and process what it was going to be like, and it didn't come out of the blue.
Yeah, I think they had a lot of good experience learning from their mistakes with Age of Sigmar.
Certainly seemed like there were some rough patches in how Sigmar rolled out, and it's not to say that there aren't some rough patches in how 40K is coming out, but I think it's been great, right? And that has been really confidence building in me, as someone who's a huge fan of the game and so on, and not the most anti-GW person I know, but definitely skeptical in some ways.
They are still a corporate entity. I mean, they deserve skepticism. But have you actually tried much in the way of Age of Sigmar? Like, did you get to experience that changeover, and have you been able to weigh that against your experience with the 40K?
So I have not, unfortunately, and I kind of regret that. It's Sigmar has been just interestingly enough to me to be kind of on my bubble of games that I kind of wish I was playing, but I'm kind of glad I'm not, right? Like, There's only so many games you can play at once before you're just diluted and not getting anything done with any of them. And it just hasn't really made that cut for me yet.
Age of Sigmar is all about bubbles. But what other games are you playing in addition to 40K? What else is in your little sphere at the moment?
So this year I've been playing a lot of Infinity. I got sucked in the end of last year finally after putting it off for a long time. And I really love it and have been consciously trying to get better at it, and was really pleased to have like a 4-month period where, I went to one tournament and I was absolutely terrible and I practiced. And now, at least in my local scene, I'm pretty good. And it was really rewarding to, put the effort in and see that improvement. And last year I played a lot of X-Wing, though I got to be honest, I'm increasingly pretty burned out on X-Wing. It's suffering a lot of the problems that I think people felt 40K had before the reboot, where, there's one dominant faction, there's a couple dominant ships, and there's a lot of heat death, where there's just so many expansions. The game is so big now that I think people are slowly tuning out a little bit.
So what you're saying is, ironically enough, X-Wing can't stay on target.
Yeah, pretty much. I have a
oh no,
I have a meme of that sitting in my home directory on my computer that I post all the time, and that is exactly what's happening.
Okay, so let's get back to 40K for a second. What are you excited about when you're playing, when you start up a game of 40K?
So I'm excited, like many people, that it's simple. It's really great to have just 12 pages of core rules. Right? So I have a buddy, Matt, him and I build a lot of terrain together. And he's more of a terrain builder than a player, and he hasn't played 40K in a long time, and now he's pumped about it, right? He started playing again. He's got like a 10-year-old son who he's been trying to get into the game for forever, and there's just no way you're going to sit down a little kid with the old rule books and have him start playing. But now, I gave him a copy of the pamphlet from the starter set, and he's in. Kid's got a whole army of orcs that he's playing against Dad with his Imperial Guard.
That's awesome.
And that's cool. Really great.
It helps that orcs are good right now too.
Yeah. And this is kind of nerdy, but I'm actually real amped about the cover and AP and just the whole weapons profiles overall. That was basically a long time coming back to 40K, and it's just, there's some issues there which we could talk about, but it's just elegant. It's nice, right? This whole pluses and minuses and the modifiers and so on, and really differentiates the weapons in a way that I think wasn't the case before. So I'm pretty amped about that nugget of the whole kernel.
So one of the things that I love about this new edition of 40k is that things actually happen. So anything pop out at you, like something hilarious or fun?
Yeah, so a little while ago, a couple weeks after the release came out, I sat down with my buddy Lavelle, who you guys have played with in the Apocalypse game. He had the Imperial Other Guard contingent.
Yeah, he's got a lot of really cool third-party tanks.
Yeah, so he's got a bunch of armies now. And so last year, basically, he started a Death Corps army using all third-party figures and stuff. It's really nice. And him and I were playing a game. And honestly, guys, it was like the best 40k that I have played outside of our Apocalypse matches in years and years. Like,
wow.
And I've played tons of good games, tons of good strategy, decision making, all this kind of stuff. But this was an excellent strategic game that was just dynamic in a way that I had never seen 40k play. Right? So basically, I've got my Space Marines plus a Knight, and he's got his Death Corps plus I guess it's a Lancer Knight, one of the anti-Knight Knights from Forge World.
Right, yeah.
And we line up on this refinery board that I made, so it's super detailed. And we're playing the long ways, so I'm like, oh, geez, I'm in real trouble here. But I basically managed to get my Knight and some Assault Terminators, to make a turn one charge into his Knight. And it just felt like that scene from the Dawn of War 3 trailer where the Knight goes crashing into the Wraith Knight. Just these titanic, colossal machines hurling at each other and just destruction right away. Like things exploding from the very first dice rolls. And it was great. And, just really dramatic. And the rest of that game was just this whole intense thing of basically him retreating down the long edges of the board while my Marines, and mind you, this is Marines, right? These are just straight up guys. They're my Kingbreaker Space Marines. They're not like, Space Wolves or Khorne Berserkers or anything. And they're using assaults not just to suppress his shooting, but to advance me down the board at lightning speed. Like I'm covering ridiculous ground because of how I'm basically able to move from assault to assault, turn to turn. And we just covered an incredible amount of ground in the game and stuff swirling all around the board. And it was great, right? And I had never played a game like that with my Marines before, where shooting mattered. Like he's pummeling me with his Colossus mortars and all this kind of stuff. But assault also mattered, not just in killing things, but in just adding, 8+ inches of movement every turn and things just flying around the board. So that was really exciting. That was a spectacular game. And I think a lot of people are having experiences like that.
I really hope some of the designers from Games Workshop just listened to the podcast and heard you do that, because I think that they'd fucking cream their pants hearing you describe that battle.
Because that sounds like Space Marines being the rapid action shock troops they've always been described as. And that made me want to ask you, how have you found the new rules? Like, you're a narrative player, a very heavily narrative player, since you put together all the big narrative events and stuff like that. How have you found the new rules to play into the narrative? How have you been able to find ways to exploit the game for narrative purposes?
One of the real strengths of 40K to me as an event designer is, in some ways, it's a pretty simple game. I go, you go, we roll dice to hit, we roll dice to wound, all this kind of stuff. So to me, it always kind of feels like a sandbox. Like it's just real easy to add stuff in and play around and come up with new missions, and they'll work, right? And obviously that doesn't mean you can't make bad missions or bad narrative features or all this kind of stuff. And that it does take a lot of thought. But it's just a great sandbox for playing with stuff. So like in the Liberty Hammer event that I mentioned, and actually in an earlier campaign, earlier this year, another weekend campaign, I've been experimenting this year with building the campaigns around story-specific characters, right? So that Liberty Hammer event, it's about control for the Darien sector. And, we started off the story last year. It's about, Lord Cyrus fighting Lady Arsica, and there's this whole backstory. And this year, I added models to them, right? So I found some models, looked pretty great. And basically each turn, the teams got to assign those characters and a couple other special characters to some of their players to help them out. And it the game continues to have just this great simplicity where I just wrote a data sheet. And now, because of the way things work, people just understood. You take that data sheet and you run with it. And it's got all the rules and all the stats and all that kind of stuff. And they were just able to integrate those characters into their gameplay right away. And the keywords make all sorts of stuff a lot simpler, like who can jump into these transports that I just gave you guys and all this kind of stuff. So, from a designer's perspective, as a sandbox, by making the game more elegant and more formal with the keywords and so on, it got even better for, designing custom missions and narratives, all this kind of stuff.
That kind of reminds me of star players in Blood Bowl. Like taking characters that are, regardless of who's using them or whatever, they have the same rules applying to them, and you can just sort of put them in anywhere, and they can have a big effect on the game.
Yep. Yeah, very much the idea.
So because I have a ton of questions about the narrative, many of which probably won't make it to the actual show because they're going to get too far into the weeds. But before we get into that, there are things about 8th edition that I do not like. For instance, why can't a tank just run over fucking orc boys when it's trying to get out of combat? Like, why is it stuck in combat? Don't like it. Don't know why it's in there. Whatever. But it is. It's cool. What are you not liking about New 40K?
I've got one thing I don't like and one thing I'm worried about. And so the big thing I'm worried about is, like a lot of people, the codexes and just the rollout of the game going forward, how it evolves, right? So it was great that they rebooted everything, all the armies on a pretty even keel. Nobody lost their units for the most part, though that's another issue. But, I'm just worried. They're a business. They got to keep selling new product, right? So they need to keep introducing new stuff. And what we've seen historically is, I think, seems pretty fair to argue, Games Workshop really struggles at introducing new things that are both relevant and not overpowered, right? And that's not really a huge knock on them, right? That's really hard, right? And you can see other games struggle with that all the time. Like, like I just said, X-Wing, I think, is really struggling with that right now. So I'm worried about not so much the next couple months. I think all these codexes are coming out within a short enough time span that they're probably pretty balanced against each other, and I wouldn't expect them to be too overpowered once they're all out. But I'm worried about, like, next year. And what does the game look like next year, end of 2018? Has it just gone back to the sort of craziness that it was at the end of 7th edition, where it's just insanity all over the place?
Well, you've had time to look at the Space Marine Codex. It's not crazy overpowered.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. I'm not worried about right now. I'm worried about how they keep at this basically sustainable point where everything's reasonably within bounds, right? So they put out these codexes by the, they're going to have 10 codexes out by the end of 2017. So then what comes out in 2018 that both keeps the business going and doesn't, sort of radically skew the game one way or another?
Well, aren't they going to be doing the whole chapter approved thing?
I'm not saying it's impossible or that they won't do it. I just think there's reasonable grounds to be afraid, right? So it seems real plausible that, for example, they put out another campaign book like, Red Wog or whatever it was that had the formation with the knights that made them almost invincible. And I'm just nervous, I think justifiably so, about these sort of things creeping into the game as they have to continue adding product. And, maybe they have totally rebooted their design process and, they're going to do these cycles pretty tightly and just keep everything within bounds. And I would, be super excited about that.
What this conversation reminds me of? It's like when you have a friend who's like into drugs. And you're like, fucking Jeff, love him to death, great guy, but man, he really likes that heroin. And you're like, oh, he's clean now, he's been to rehab, he's not doing anything wrong, but could he slip up? Could he start getting high again? I feel like that's a worry that all of us have with Games Workshop as an entity that's addicted to money. Okay, so that's the thing that worries you. What is the thing you were alluding to that you don't like?
So the thing I don't like are the terrain rules. I think basically they took a really nice weapons profile system and mechanics, and to some extent just kind of wasted it on having oversimplified terrain rules, right? And it gets kind of down in the weeds, but as written, there's a lot of weird cases where, like, say I've got one Marine standing on top of a container and I've got another guy standing next to it, but obscured, hiding behind the container. He's not in cover because he's not on it, while the guy standing in plain sight on top of it is in cover. It's just kind of silly. And obviously you can fix all that kind of stuff in house rules, but and so on. But I'm really against in-house mods to the game. I think it's problematic. So I think they have this great, elegant system for doing a lot of really interesting things with terrain, but they really don't want to use it, right? Especially as the FAQs have come out, they've made very clear that they want to minimize line of sight considerations, all this kind of stuff. And I think they've gone a bit overboard with oversimplifying that aspect of the game.
I think that's a fairly common criticism, is that the new terrain rules are too simple and aren't granular enough. And we talked about it a little bit in the last episode, and I think even the introduction of some more variable cover levels, say like fortified cover being +2 to your save instead of just +1, or some sort of dangerous cover giving you a negative to your save, could just give it a little bit more flexibility and a little more flavor.
Yeah, and that's the good news about this whole new framework, and hopefully the new mindset that they'll capitalize on this, is that they could do that very easily, right? They don't need to publish a new rule book. They don't need to change the core mechanics. Like, the core is there. They just say, need to put out a PDF of, hey guys, here's a bunch of updated, common, generic terrain data sheets that you should use instead of the core rules. And that would really improve my appreciation of the game quite a bit.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit to talk about the Nova narrative. Now, I've said many times in the past that the Nova narrative is the most fun I've ever had playing 40k. Last year was certainly the case. It was the most fun I'd had at that point. The year before was the most fun I'd had at that point. And I'm pretty sure this next year is going to be even more fun now that we have a more appropriately balanced and competitive game in the 8th edition. So 8th edition kind of dropped in the middle of Nova planning. And I don't know how much you had for a, hey, this is happening, you've got to react to it from the people that run Nova. But I have to imagine that adapting it, your narrative plans to meet the needs of this new edition, came with some challenges.
In some ways, it hasn't been a huge deal. Not as much as you would think, in that, it's still 40k, right? It's still the core game. The basic dynamics, I go, you go, squads, all this kind of stuff are still there. So I think an awful lot has carried over. And, you can even see that in the core rulebook, in how many of the missions are just basically straight carries over from previous editions, for better or for worse. Mm-hmm. In a lot of cases, I think that's for worse. It would have been good if they'd worked on some new missions, but they're the same missions we all know, and they still basically work in the game. So, a lot of it's not like we had to go and completely rethink, like, oh, how does a mission work, right? It's not like all of a sudden we're writing more skirmish-oriented objectives and all this kind of stuff. The one thing that has kind of been not a huge deal, but is a little bit of a pain, is that on the one hand, it's really nice that people have this concept of data sheets now in a way that they didn't really have before. So if you just put a data sheet in front of somebody, they'll just roll with it, right? And they've got it. But the loss of USRs, I think, was a step backwards, actually. Like, it didn't really make sense to me to introduce this whole nice keyword system, but then get rid of all these USRs, which were keywords, basically, with standardized rules, right? And that makes it actually pretty hard to quickly spec out a unit, right? You can't just say, oh, this is a Dreadnought Walker. Like, you need to copy in a whole bunch of rules, or you can't just say this is a hovering flyer. Like, you need to copy in all these specific rules about hovering, because hovering is not a game concept anymore, in a sense, right? All these different flying transports that can hover, for example, they're all defining those rules duplicatively. So, if you want to define your own hovering transport, you can't just say that. You need to copy all these rules. And that's part of my concern is that, they've done that over time, and you wind up in the past with all these weird issues where, like, a Dark Angel's heavy bolter is not quite the same as an Ultramarines heavy bolter because they're in a different codex. And instead of just pointing to the heavy bolter profile in the main rulebook, they copy paste everywhere and it gets out of sync. And that is definitely going to happen in this new edition because there's just so much of that going on.
In the past, Games Workshop has a definite history of being like, oh, well, the rules for this in the Space Marine Codex are A, but in the Dark Angels Codex are B, and in the Blood Angels Codex are C.
Same deal, all these different units have all these different ways of essentially deep striking onto the board, except they're not, there's no universal deep strike rule. They all have their own rules. A lot of them are slightly different, and it's just going to be very hard to keep track of what is possibly coming at you from the other armies. So that's, part of my concern about the game evolving forward is that because less is standardized than before, they're going to have a lot more of those kind of issues. We get in these cases like, well, this is the same gun, but it has a slightly different profile in this book. Is that intentional, or did they just forget to copy and paste that column of the table, or like what happened here? So I think there's going to be a lot of confusion about that kind of stuff.
Well, I think that's the point of the chapter approved books that'll be coming out yearly, is to iron over a lot of those things. Because, yeah, like you said, when you have three guys and three different units that can all quote unquote deep strike and they mean different things and they're slightly different, you get more and more confusion, and the need for parity between them is greater.
Yeah, and that'll be great if they do it, but they could have just avoided a whole lot of that by keeping the USRs and keeping standardized weapon profiles.
Yeah, I think there's definitely kind of a slash and burn ethos as far as the game design went here, and it works in a lot of ways. In some other ways, they could dial it back a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the draw of wanting to be able to say you have a 12-page rulebook, but it's really kind of misleading if you've gotten it down to 12 pages by basically putting 30 pages into individual data sheets running around all over the place.
Okay. I totally get where you're coming from there, but we're going to redirect to the narrative event itself. Now, one of my favorite things about the narrative event is it's a multi-day event where we've had, at least the past few years, the same core of people come out and play it, and we've all gotten to know one another, and we've all gotten to, there's a couple of rivalries here and there. There's a couple of, with me and Greg Hess is a great example of, I beat him this year, and he beat me last year, so where's that rubber match coming? And last year, when you started running it, you really upped the ante with the tons of 3D printed counters and models and things that you had brought for the event itself, and then B, with all of the really, I thought, cool game design that comes into the missions that you brought too, specifically the crashing spaceship mission, which I thought was one of the coolest mechanics I've ever seen in a thing. So I want to ask you, what do you think makes the Nova narrative campaign so great? And what are you going to do this year to up the ante?
So, like you said, I think a lot of it is that you're there for several days and you're all committed and you're all basically just buying into like, hey guys, we're going to ignore the real world and just live in plastic space dolly world.
That's my favorite thing. The real world is terrible.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, God forbid you have to go farther than the food trucks outside the hotel.
And I don't.
Yeah, right? That's a big part of it, is just that you're there and you're committed for a whole bunch of games, right? So you really see the relationships between people develop, and it's, both teammates and friendly rivalries in the other teams. And it just adds so much context and so much personal investment and emotion to the games that's tough to beat, right? That's a whole different kind of gaming experience from just, showing up at a con and playing a couple rounds against people you won't see ever again.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, an example, last year, this fella, John, and I forget his last name, we were basically racing each other to see who could kill the most civilians in our games.
Yeah.
And we tied at the end of it with the same amount of civilians heartlessly murdered in our games.
Yeah, and didn't you guys play in the final game? And
no, we didn't. We purposefully avoided playing each other in the final game so we wouldn't like immediately muck it up. It would come down to the end of the game to be more dramatic. I don't know how it's going to go this year with that, but that was such a fun little bit where, I mean, the number of civilians killed really didn't affect the outcome of the campaign too much. At least I don't think, but it was just a fun little thing where John and I could lose our minds over taking out, just really in the most evil manners possible. Like I remember at one point I had a whole Lehman Russ Punisher take an entire turn of shooting with all of its weapons at one civilian. It was out of range of anything else, and I was like, you know what? That civilian over there needs to die.
Yeah, I think that mechanic, one of the reasons we put that in there was we worry a lot about players not having bad games, right? And you can wind up with a lot of bad matchups, and you're there, and you're just like, oh, I'm not winning games, and I'm not really contributing to my team winning the campaign, all this kind of stuff. So one aspect of those civilians is it gives you another mission objective that you can do, right? And you can really focus on that even if you're having a rough time otherwise, right? And that's part of our thinking behind all these different mechanics and the different secondary objectives and all this kind of stuff is trying to give ways to enjoy the game even if you're losing, right? Like I'm getting crushed, I'm losing the battle, but I'm winning my personal objectives, all this kind of stuff.
Before we wrap up, can you give us just a little quick preview of some of the changes coming up for this year's narrative?
Yeah, so, the schedule changed a lot, which doesn't sound that interesting, except it lets us really focus in on different ways on some of these aspects, right? So, like, the warlords, the players who are committed to being there for, most of the games, they're living and breathing this. They've got armies they love. They're invested in the Nova story, all this kind of stuff. And they're going to have, like, really dedicated sessions to worry about this. And, we've always had those warlords meetings and so on in the past, but they're definitely going to matter more this time, right? In terms of, not going overboard and making them too complex, but I'm hopeful and fairly confident that those are going to feel like, real strategy sessions where you're like looking at maps and you are the commanders of these forces and you're making very concrete decisions. Like you've always made decisions, but I think this time it's going to really feel like you're going to understand what's happening in the campaign a lot better. It's less abstract at the campaign level than it was before. So that should be fun.
Then maybe I shouldn't get as drunk as I usually do in the warlord meetings.
No, I think that's totally fine. You just you just delegate your decision-making votes to somebody else.
Last year, I was only part of the Night Fighters group, and I just crashed every single one of the Warlords meetings anyway. And that was my favorite part of the event.
We're basically going to emphasize that even more, where it's not going to go overboard with the complexity, but I think some people, if you weren't focused on it, it could be easy to lose track of what impact the decisions coming out of those meetings were having. And I'm hoping to make that a lot more overt this year. And, in some ways that is just, hey, there's a map. Everybody understands maps in a way that, has more impact than just sort of abstract tallies of how different regions are doing. And another is, similar to the events earlier in this year that I mentioned, we're going to introduce some special characters. And, if you look, the primer from the event primer from last year, the event primer this year, like, there's quotes and little bits of fluff from different characters. And there's just a whole bunch of story there that we didn't manage to really develop last year. And this time it's coming in. And, again, we're real focused on not overcomplicating things. But I think it's going to be real sweet, say, when those warlords get to decide, like, hey, here's Commander so-and-so, and he's going to go help out Dan Boyd because he's got a rough matchup coming up. I think that'll be fun.
All of my matchups are rough because I'm terrible at this stupid game. All right, so let's do a couple of rapid fires, and then we're going to play our patented, trademarked, copyrighted game, of Fuck, Marry, Kill Primarchs Edition with you, Mr. Joe.
What was your first Black Library novel?
First and Only.
Nice.
About the
It's a good one.
Tanith Guardsman.
Tanith Ghosts, yeah.
And, that was a great series of books, great series of characters.
Who wins in a fight, Colonel Straken or Commissar Yarick?
Strachan. Absolutely. I can say that without a doubt because I have a custom converted Strachan character that I made. He will absolutely win.
Would you be willing to incorporate my fan fiction in your next narrative event? It has Gilman in it, where he's both a detective and also my dad.
Tentatively, yes.
All right, Joe, it's time. The time that everybody's been waiting for. Fuck, marry, kill with the Primarchs. You have 18 choices, 3 categories. Give them to us, please.
Ooh.
We're going to start with the fuck, like we always do.
Of Rogel Dorn.
You're fucking Rogel Dorn?
Let's go for it.
Okay, why?
He's a dignified man's man. I'm all about it. Nice, solid character.
Oh, that's the best fucking answer we've had yet. Okay, who you got for Mary?
Vulcan.
We get a lot of Mary Vulcan.
He's a dependable choice.
Yeah, he seems like a real sweetheart.
He's sane. That's really a big attribute I'm looking for here in amongst these selections. And I'm big into the emphasis on the the science and artistry, all that kind of stuff. Sounds like a good partner.
I bet he can grill real good too.
Yeah.
Flamecraft, baby. All right, man. Who you killing?
Gotta go with Reboot.
Ooh,
Oh!
I'm hurt. Wounded even.
Whoa! In an upset. What's so bad about him?
There's nothing bad about him. He's just all over the place. Like, shut up already. I really, really like the character, because similar deal. Like, he's all about building the society, civilization. The Ultramarines, I think, are some of the most interesting guys, even though they're a bit overplayed in terms of like the heresy books and so on. But damn, now I'm just so tired of him being everywhere.
He's kind of like Superman at this point. He's saving the day everywhere.
Yeah.
I get about it. Joe's a little bit of a hipster in that Reboot might be too popular for him to like.
Yeah,
Well-
that's totally what's going on.
Well,
I
once
was
you went
cool
mainstream.
before he was cool, and now I'm not.
Yeah, his early stuff is fantastic. His layer shit, not so much. He totally sold out after he came back from the dead.
All right, man. So before you go, how about you give a plug of stuff you're working on or anything you want our listeners to know about?
Yeah, so if anybody's interested, got a website at rocketshipgames.com, and actually you can find my blog there. It talks a lot about different narrative events that we've been running up in the Philly area. Recaps, storylines, mechanics overviews, all this kind of stuff. And recently I've been running a couple Kickstarters producing basically 3D printed terrain, all sorts of just different small sets and so on. And I'm hoping to basically slowly turn that into a side thing. So if you're looking for like a sweet set of objectives or so on, you should check it out at rocketshipgames.com.
All right, Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show. We're going to see you in about 3 weeks, and I'm turgid with excitement.
Yeah, I'm super stoked. I think it's going to be really, really fun this year.
All right, really, really great interview with Joe. I want to thank him and implore everyone to check out rocketshipgames.com, his website where he designs his own games. He does a bunch of posts about the events he does in the Philly area, and as he said, is running some Kickstarters for some really cool terrain. So next up, Campbell, it's Factor Fan Fiction.
That it is.
How spicy is it this week?
It's pretty mild.
How many
this week.
Scovilles would you say?
I'd say it's the equivalent of, say, a poblano.
Oh, okay.
So it's
Delicious.
not too hot, but it's funky.
You shouldn't have said poblano. I had tacos for lunch, and now I'm going to fucking go get tacos for dinner.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Oh, God, I'm going to die of heart disease.
Aren't we all?
All right, please give me that spicy, spicy fan fiction I require.
After familiarizing himself with a heavy weapon in a squad and by acquiring proximity battle in an ambush squad, Lettuce Gain found her own career. Tactical Squad, Tactical Marine. His speed of fire is amazing, even if it is a shooting while running to the front line. The bullet he shoots hits the enemy with ruthless accuracy. There are few things that go out to the right of the gains in the shooting while moving. Indeed, in the final charge of victory, he is often at the forefront of it. My brother, you know I shoot 3 shots while you are firing 2 shots, but the number of enemies that my bullets will beat will not fall as high as yours. Asodian Vaniel is a spectacular even at the skill of bolter, but he gradually became an expert on explosive throwing due to its excellent strength and sharp eyesight. He became an informal grenade soldier of the Sevastus squad, throwing a flag grenade into an enemy group with an unreliable precision and disabling the enemy with its explosive power. And the Vanuel and his compatriots advance from the moment when the plume is not clear, sting the enemies with enemies by bolter. A messy gangster, a small gift from Ultramar, let's end your suffering forever. Heavy Bolter, used by Space Marine's heavy weapon, boasts the weight and enormity that even an ordinary person cannot lift. But for Donato's triad, love guns are eternal buddies and are trustworthy friends. The recoil generated by the shooting of large bombs is enough for Bones, but does not bother the triad. Now, the triad is even looking forward to the brutal rebound of the love gun as a sign of wonderful explosion that happens inside the enemy. Is it the annihilation of the enemy? Sergeant is what I want.
Okay. I know what these are. This is fact. This is real shit. Mm-hmm. If I'm not incorrect, I think this is the Google translated version of the Japanese text accompanying the Space Marine hero characters that they released in the Japanese market.
You are 110% correct. So yes, you are.
I had read the one about the heavy bolter and the love gun, but I hadn't heard the other two.
I'd seen the heavy bolter and the love gun, and that was when I was like, okay, I've got my material for next week.
That's so funny. A flag grenade, huh?
A flag grenade, yeah.
That's good shit. Is it the annihilation of the enemy, Sergeant? It is what I need.
It is what I want. I'm a big fan of a messy gangster, a small gift from Ultramar.
Oh, those messy gangsters. All right, so that's it for us on this wonderful 15th episode of the 40k Badcast. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to tell you about ways that you can contact us like we do at the end of every episode. You can drop us a line at contact@40kbadcast.com and ask us if we want to play games, tell us that we're stupid, and please send us pictures of your miniatures. We got a great crop of, I think, Chaos Bikers from a listener who we're going to include in the show notes today so everybody can see them, with some very interesting poses.
Yeah, there's a cool little group of, I think they might be Blood Angels, but Red Marines on motorcycles, and they look cool.
I love some Red Rocket Marines. Oh, boy. Oh, boy. You can find us on Twitter. I am at DB_sleazy, where I retweet nicely painted models. Or at least that's the last 2 weeks I've been doing. And maybe some jokes. Jokes and models, mainly.
And you can find me at Brother SRM, where I mostly retweet shit about Toad and a bunch of my own jokes.
Toad as in the villain from the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants?
No, as in the I'm the best guy from Mario Kart.
Are you sure it's not Toad the Wet Sprocket? Love me some wet sprockets.
Shit, who did Possum Kingdom? Oh well,
the Toadies.
The Toadies. That was it. I was like, I had a fourth Toad thing.
I think that's a song about murdering a young woman.
It very well may be.
Write in and tell us about your thoughts about the Toadies classic Possum Kingdom at contact@40kbadcast.com.
Or all their other hits.
I would go to a Toadies show.
You know what? I went to a Collective Soul show for free in Boston once where they were giving away free croissants, and that's where I'd see Toadies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my opinion too. Like they played the riff, and I was like, yeah, I remember that riff.
Yeah. There's a great video where they replaced a yeah with a cat meowing. It's one of my favorite internet videos. I also want to, once again, tell everybody to go to rocketshipgames.com to check out Joe's stuff. He's a really cool guy, so I want him to succeed at everything he does in life. So please go there and help him do that. Campbell.
Yeah. Oh, Camhammer is back. My little YouTube show, Camhammer, is back with a new episode on Is Now a Good Time to Start 30K. I teased it last time, but it is out and in the wild now, and I'm working on another one to come out next week.
That's awesome. So, I haven't actually watched that yet. I got to go take a look.
You should watch. I might change your mind, or not. So go to youtube.com/Camhammer Show, and you can find out what I think about the Horus Heresy after 8th edition.
Do you want to add any more to that run-on sentence? I'm sorry I'm being so critical.
I want to, but I don't think I can.
All right. Do you have a inspiring quote for us for the end of this episode?
I do. The boys are back in town! The boys are back in town! The boys are back in town!
I'm Dan Boyd. He's Campbell McLaughlin. We're the 40k Badcast. We'll see you next time.